everyone, I thought I would share this pattern for this candy corn witch hat ghost with everyone to kind of celebrate that spooky season is finally upon us. So you can use fluffy yarn to make a larger variant of it if you'd like a soft and fluffy spooky boy, but I'm going to be using worsted weight for this tutorial just because I tend to prefer working with worsted weight anyhow. Alright, so I posted all of the supplies that you're going to need to make these spooky ghosts in the description below, so check that out and then we're ready to go ahead and get started. Alright, so let's get started on the ghosts pattern. So we're going to begin with our white yarn, and we're going to want to tie a magic loop with that yarn. So the way I like to tie my magic loops, feel free to fast forward if you're comfortable tying your own, but the way that I like to tie my magic loops is I sort of make a finger guns here with my left hand, because I'm a right hand crocheter, and I will pinch about 5 inches of that tail against the lower digit of my index and middle finger, and then take the working yarn, so not the tail, which is the end that's not attached to our skein, but take my working yarn in my right hand, and then flip my left hand over, and then wrap the working yarn around that top digit of my middle and index finger on my right hand. Then I'm going to flip my right hand back over and continue wrapping, crossing that working yarn over what I already have wrapped around my fingers. I'm going to flip my left hand back over again and cross it over my lower digit. Then flip my left hand over one more time and snug that yarn behind my thumb. Once you've done that, you can take your crochet hook in your right hand, flip your left hand back over, and then go underneath that top loop with your hook and hook that bottom loop and pull it straight underneath the top loop. So once you've done that, we're going to do a little gymnastics here with our hands. We're going to flip them both back over. So I'm flipping away from my body when I do this. And then I'm going to bring them together so that my fingers are touching, like the ones on my hook hand are touching the back of the hand that has the wraps on it. Once I've got them so that they're close by each other, I'm going to take my index finger and my thumb, and I'm going to grab both of the loops, the one that's on my finger still and the one that's on my hook. I'm going to pinch them pretty tightly. Then I can let go with my thumb and gently slide those loops off of my fingers. Now let's make another distinction here. Remember, this is the tail and this is the working yarn. So I like to take my tail and kind of push it over my working yarn, and then take my index finger on my left hand and lay my working yarn over the top of my index finger. Once I've done that, I can take the rest of my fingers on my left hand and wrap it around what's on, like, the working yarn over my index finger. Then I also like to take my middle finger and my thumb, and I'll grab this pretzel twist here. You can kind of see it's where the tail and that loop that we tied sort of cross over themselves. So I take my middle finger and thumb on my left hand and give that pretzel twist a pinch, which makes it so I can let go with my thumb and index finger on my right hand. So things feel a little loosey-goosey right now, which is totally normal. We can also practice tensioning by pulling our index finger on our left hand. You can kind of go back and forth by tugging up that loop. It gives you a sort of a feel for what tensioning is like. But once we've tensioned that loop on our hook by pulling our index finger on our left hand away, we can then take our hook and yarn over, meaning put the yarn over our hook and pull it through that loop, which locks our magic loop in place. We don't have to worry about anything coming undone. It's now secure. One last thing I like to do before I begin is that pretzel twist that we pinched earlier, we're going to want to untangle that. So just grab the tail, so the part that's not the loop, and pull it out of that pretzel twist. And congratulations, you have just formed your magic loop. And then when we start working in this magic loop, we're going to work both in the loop itself, so this loop here, and over that tail that we just untangled. So I like to hold them in my left hand together with my middle finger and thumb. And when we start working, we can go directly underneath both of those. So just straight through our loop and under both the loop and the tail itself. All right, so before I get started, you'll probably notice up in the top left-hand corner, there are some instructions. That is the written version of the pattern. And that's gonna stay up anytime that there's any crocheting that needs to happen. It's a way for me to kind of keep track of where we are in the pattern, but also kind of demonstrate what this would look like if you were reading a written pattern. So if you look in the top left right now, it says that we need to put 6 SC inside of our ML. So that means 6 single crochet stitches inside of our magic loop. So let's go ahead and make our first single crochet stitch. To do that, we'll take our hook and we're gonna push it from front to back through that loop and underneath both the loop and that tail. Then just like we did when we closed off our magic loop, we're going to grab that working yarn, pull it through the loop and then up a little bit. We don't want it to be too tight. Then yarn over and pull through both. And that forms our first single crochet stitch. And then what I like to do with this single crochet stitch is tighten it a little bit by grabbing it with my index finger and thumb on my right hand and shifting it over to the right a little bit. Then we're also going to want to mark this stitch because it is the first stitch of our round. So I'm going to grab my stitch marker and I'm going to push it underneath the little V. You can see both legs of it here. Underneath both sides of that stitch. And then lock it in place. Alright, so our pattern is telling us that we need to have 6 single crochet stitches inside of this magic loop. So we're going to repeat the same thing we just did with that first stitch another 5 times. Alright, so that is all 6 of my stitches, and you can double check how many you have by turning your work kind of on its side and looking at the little V's that are formed with each stitch. So if you look, we've got 1, which we've marked, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Alright, so now it's time to do the magic part of our magic loop. We're going to take that tail, and we're going to, by holding our active stitch, so the one that our hook's coming out of with our thumb and index finger, we can take the tail with our left hand and pull, which closes off our round and sets us up for round 2. Alright, so for round 2, we're going to take our stitch marker out and we're going to be working right where that stitch marker was, so underneath that first V of our first stitch from round 1. So if we look at the top left here, we've got something new that we need to do for round 2, and that is an INC, or increase. So the way that I like to increase is I'm going to put 2 single crochet stitches in the same stitch. So we're going to go ahead and go through that first stitch from front to back under both of the loops of the stitch, yarn over just like we have been before by putting our yarn over our hook, and then we're going to draw through and up, and then yarn over and draw through again. That's the first stitch of our round as well, so we're going to go ahead and mark that. And then to complete our increase, we need to put 1 more single crochet stitch in that exact same space that we just made our first stitch. So if you look, you can kind of see the hole that it's coming out of. We need to go through that same hole again. So we're just going to push from front to back through, yarn over, draw up a loop, yarn over, and draw through 2. And then if you look at your work, you can see we have 2 of the little V's of our stitch coming out of the same space from the row before. So we need to continue increasing in each stitch all the way around. Alright, so I've just finished my last increase in the last stitch of my round, And then if you look at the top left, you'll see that there is a number in parentheses. That's telling us how many single crochet stitches we should have ended with for our round. So you can always double check the amount of stitches that you have by turning your work on its side and counting the little V's all the way around. If you find you don't have the correct number of stitches, it's probably very likely that you may have only put one single crochet stitch in a space. So you can look at this, the front of your piece, to see if you can see two stitches coming out of the same hole all the way across. That's one of the great things about crochet is it's really easy to troubleshoot. So if you find a place where you've made a mistake, like let's say I only put one stitch here, you can grab the stitch that's correct and pull your working yarn to unravel all of the incorrect stitches, then put your hook back through that loop and proceed as if the mistake had never happened. Alright, so I've corrected my mistake and I'm ready to move on to round 3. So round 3, in the top left you can see we have some asterisks. So in crochet patterns, those asterisks mean we need to repeat everything that's inside of them in the order that they appear as many times as it takes for us to go all the way around our work. So our asterisks are telling us to put one single crochet stitch in the first stitch here. So we'll go through. And don't forget, we want to mark that stitch as well, since it's our first stitch of the round. And then it's saying our next stitch needs to be an increase. So we'll go through our next stitch, put a single crochet stitch inside of it, and then another one in the same space. And that completes everything inside of the asterisks one time. So we're going to continue repeating what's inside of those asterisks until we get to the other side of our stitch marker. Alright, so that wraps up round 3. So for round 4, all we need to do is put one single crochet stitch in every stitch all the way around. So that's just one single crochet in each single crochet stitch from the previous round. Alright, I just finished round 4, so I'm going to move on to round 5. And we have another asterisks repeat pattern here. So we're going to put one single crochet stitch in the next 2 stitches. So one single crochet here, one here, and then an increase in the stitch after that. And then we're going to repeat that sequence of one single crochet, increase all the way around. Alright, so for rounds 6 through 9, so 6, 7, 8, and 9, all we need to do is put one single crochet stitch in every stitch all the way around. So here's me starting in on round 6. I will get back to you whenever I am wrapping up the end of round 9. Alright, so I'm wrapping up my last stitch of round 9. And before I move on to round 10, which is where we're going to add the arms, I wanted to really quickly point out, as you're crocheting, your piece is going to kind of cup a little bit, which is what we want. We want our ghost to have sort of a rounded head. But as it cups, sometimes it goes the wrong direction. So take a good hard look at what you've crocheted already. The outside is going to look like this. It's got pretty neat, tidy little V's for your stitches. And the inside is the side that that magic loop tail is going to be on. So as you've been crocheting, there's a chance that your project has been cupping the wrong direction. So if your little ghostie has this tail here coming out of the top of its head, and your stitches have these little lines that run through, this is the inside of your piece. So take this time now to sort of flip it so that it's facing the right direction. I know whenever I started crocheting, no one told me about that distinction, so I made some pieces inside out and found they didn't look as nice as what I saw in the picture. All right, so now that we're done with that, let's go ahead and start in on round 10. So round 10, we're going to begin by putting one single crochet stitch in the first 5 stitches of the round. And then we're going to be making a 5 double crochet bobble stitch in our next stitch. So to make a 5 double crochet bobble stitch, we're going to start off by yarning over first. So we're going to take our hook and we're going to put the yarn over it, sort of wrapping it around. Then we're going to go through our next stitch and then yarn over and draw through that stitch. Then we're going to yarn over and draw through these 2 loops on our hook. And then we're going to repeat that same process, yarning over, going through the same stitch that we went through, drawing up a loop, yarning over and drawing through 2. We're going to repeat that until we've done it 5 times. That's why it's called a 5 double crochet bobble, because there's going to be 5 of them coming out of the same stitch. So yarn over, go through that same stitch, draw up a loop, yarn over and draw through 2. There's 3. 4. And 5. And yes, we have a lot of loops on our hook now, which is what we want. So to close off this bobble stitch, we're going to take our hook and yarn over one last time, and then draw it through every single loop on our hook. We should have 6 of them total. So draw through, and you want that to be pretty tight because we want all of those stitches to kind of cluster together. And then we're going to close this bobble stitch off by making a chain 1. So we're going to yarn over and draw it through the loop on our hook. And that closes off the bobble stitch. Now, sometimes your bobble stitch might be the wrong direction. They like to they're a little squirrely sometimes, and they'll pop the wrong way. If it does that, just take your finger and fold it so that all of those stitches they pop out of the surface of the work. All right, so that's the first arm of our ghostie. We're going to go ahead and continue single crocheting for 5 more stitches. A word of caution though, your bobble stitch sometimes will hide the stitch that you're supposed to go into next. So look very carefully that you don't miss that next single crochet stitch. And then we also want to work the single crochet stitch pretty tightly because this bobble is really tall, and if we don't work this single crochet tightly, there's a little bit of a gap that can open up. So we're going to go through that next stitch and tension pretty tight with your index finger, and then draw through, and then draw through both. Now, of course, there's still going to be a little bit of a gap, but we'll adjust for this for the next round. All right, so that's 1 single crochet. We need to make 4 more. So now we have 5. We're going to go ahead and put our second bobble stitch to form the ghost's other arm. So that's another 5 double crochet bobble. So I have all 5 of those done. Draw through, and then chain 1. And then we're going to just continue single crocheting in every single crochet stitch left this round. Alright, so I just finished round 10 and I'm ready for round 11. So round 11, we're going to be putting single crochet stitches in basically all of the stitches, but we have to do something special over the bobble stitch. So we'll start off by putting 1 single crochet stitch in the first 5 stitches of round 11. And here's my 5th one. And then that chain that we made on the top of our stitch actually adds a stitch to this round, which we don't want. So what I like to do is first I'm going to single crochet in this stitch here right next to my chain. That's the Bobble stitch's actual stitch. So that'll be my 6th single crochet, which counts as the Bobble. And then we need to make sure we end up with the right amount of stitches, and we also don't want this loose kind of gap next to the ghost's hand. So we're going to go through that chain 1 we made, and we're going to actually decrease. So we're going to go ahead, go through that chain 1, and then draw up a loop, and then pause. And we're going to do that exact same thing in the next stitch right by the Bobble stitch. So go through, yarn over and draw up a loop. And then to decrease, we're going to draw through all 3 of those loops. That helps close up the gap between the Bobble stitch where the chain is and corrects that extra chain, which adds an extra stitch to our round. So we're going to keep single crocheting. We've already done 1. So there's 5 between each Bobble. So we've done 1. So here's 2, 3, 4, and 5. Then the single crochet, that's the Bobble. It's right there. And then we need to do another decrease. So we're going to go through that chain 1 that we made on the other Bobble stitch and draw up a loop. And then go through the stitch right next door and draw up a loop. And then decrease. And then from here, the rest of the row works up pretty easy, just 1 single crochet stitch all the way around. Alright, so before we start in on round 12, I like to add the safety eyes at this point. So I'm going to draw that last loop up long, and then flip my ghost over so I can see his little hands. And I like to place the safety eyes so that they're just above and slightly inside of where the Bobble stitch hands are. So at about here. So let's find where that is so you can do the same thing if you'd like. So we've got round 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Between rounds 8 and 9 and about 3 stitches apart. However, you can play around with this. Don't feel like you have to make it the exact same way that I do. You can make the eyes a little higher and further apart, a little lower. You can embroider them. You can leave the eyes off. It's really up to you because crochet is such a versatile art form. But once you've got the eyes where you'd like them to be, if you're using safety eyes like me, you can snap the plastic backs on. And they are locked in place. And if you're also embroidering a mouth on, now is a pretty good time to do it. So let me go ahead and grab my embroidery floss and my embroidery needle. And a quick hack, I actually use this really thin ply crochet thread whenever I'm embroidering things. I find it doesn't fray very much, which I like, and then you get a whole bolt of it for like $3-4. It's a really good deal. So highly recommend grabbing one of these for your embroidery. Right, so I'm gonna go ahead and thread my embroidery needle, and then I'm gonna tie a knot at the end of my embroidery needle by grabbing the tail, so the side that is not attached to the needle itself, pinching it to the needle, and then wrapping counterclockwise 5, 6, 7, 8 times or so. And then holding tight with my thumb, I'm going to slide all of those wraps down over the eye of the needle, and then just keep sliding them till they go to the end of my thread, and then I can tighten. I'm also going to trim this tail. I don't like it hanging out while I'm crocheting. Alright, so I'm going to give my ghost a W-shaped mouth. I think it's really cute. So I'm going to go up through the back and inside of my ghost, and then start with the center part of the mouth. So I'm going to make a stitch that's centered in the center of the eyes and then kind of close to the tops of them. And then I'm going to make the inside right part of my W, so the right leg. So I'm going to sew a diagonal stitch down about almost all the way through the row below it. So there's the first side. And then I like to sew the outside of the W next, so the left outside part. I'm going to line up that top stitch so that it's in line with the center stitch that I sewed. And then I'll sew it at the same angle that I sewed the inside at. So now that I've got the outside left, I'm going to sew the inside left. I'm going to come up through where this first stitch came up through. And then I'm going to go down through the same stitch that this stitch came down through. And then I find that this last leg is the hardest to get just right. So I'm going to come up through where the first stitch went down and sew very carefully on this one. And then I like to stretch my embroidery floss up so that I can sort of get an idea for where it needs to go in. So I'm going to go through here. Which gives me the W-shaped smile. That's really cute. Last thing we need to do is we're going to tie a surface knot, but we need to do it inside of the ghost's body so we can hide it. So I like to flip him sort of inside out. And then I'm going to loop my embroidery floss around on the surface. And then I like to grab just a little bit of the fabric. So you can see I kind of went underneath that stitch there. And then I'm going to come up through that loop. And as I pull, you can see it's tying a knot, which is what we want. Then, since this is inside of our ghost's head, we don't even have to weave this tail in. We can just cut it short, but not off. And that secures it inside and hides the knot in our ghost's head. All right, so we are ready to start in on round 12. So I'll go ahead and reinsert my hook through that loop and pull. And rounds 12 through 15, all we need to do is put one single crochet stitch in each stitch all the way around. So I'm going to catch you back here whenever I get a little closer to the end of round 15, and I'll show you how to finish up the bottom half of the ghost. Alright, I am wrapping up round 15, and you can see our ghost has gotten a little bit longer since last we talked. So we're getting ready to wrap up the ghost. So to do that, for round 16, we need to start decreasing and working in the back loop only. So let's take it one step at a time. Start by taking your stitch marker out. And then remember when we first started, we talked about the V of the stitch, the front and the back leg. When we work in the back loop only, rather than going through front to back underneath both, we're only going to want to grab the one at the back. So remember, this is the front side of our work. The loop that's closest to the front is called the front loop, and the one that's closest to the back side is called the back loop. A very creative name here in the crochet community. We're very good at naming things. So we're going to grab just that back loop. So take your hook and just slip it through the back loop only. And then from here it's just a regular single crochet, and it leaves the front loop behind, which is what we want because we're going to come back for that front loop later. Don't forget, that's also our first stitch of the round, so we're going to want to mark it. Then we need to do another back loop only single crochet. And then we need to do a back loop only single crochet decrease, which is kind of a mouthful. I like the abbreviation form of it more. But it's just like what we did here with the bobble stitch, where we decreased by putting we made one single crochet take up the space of two. We're going to be doing the same thing here, except only in the back loops of the stitch. So let me walk you through it a little bit. We're going to go through the back loop of the next stitch and draw up a loop, and then pause and do the same thing in the next. Then we'll yarn over and draw through all of the loops left on our hook. And you can see we've got one single crochet stitch that takes up the space of two, and we've left the front loops behind. So we're going to continue that same sequence because it's inside of some asterisks. Another back loop only single crochet in the next two stitches, and then a back loop only single crochet decrease. The yarn is squeaky! And we're going to continue that pattern until we are all the way around. Alright, that wraps up round 16, so we're ready to continue decreasing for round 17. And we're back to working in both loops of our stitch. So we're going to go ahead and put our first single crochet stitch, just like we normally would, and mark that as well. And then we're going to decrease, and then repeat that same sequence all the way around. Alright, so before we do our last round, which is round 18, we're going to want to stuff our ghost as well. So I'll take this last stitch whenever I stuff and pull it long, and then make sure to keep it out of your way while you're stuffing, because I've done it several times where I'll have stuffed everything and then realize that this loop is stuck inside underneath the stuffing, so just keep that in mind. But let's go ahead and grab some stuffing and stuff the inside of our ghost. So when you're stuffing your ghost, I like to use little tiny chunks. So I just stuffed the top half of his head. I also like to make sure my safety eyes aren't accidentally at an angle. So I'll sort of correct by moving the stems inside of the ghost's head to make sure they're in the right place, and then keep stuffing. We also don't want to overstuff our ghost. See how he sort of flattens out with that front loop that we left behind? That's what we want. If you put too much stuffing in, that bottom part will sort of pucker open, which is not ideal. So I also like to sort of pull the sides of my ghost apart this way. I find that gives him a really cute shape. So I'm going to add a little more fluff. Alright, so that is the ghost stuffed, which means we are ready to finish off round 18. We're going to take our hook, reinsert it into that loop we drew long, and then just pull so that it's the right tension on our hook itself. Then for round 18, all we need to do is decrease in every stitch all the way around. Alright, so I have decreased in every stitch all the way around, and now it's time to fasten off. So fastening off is sort of like a series of steps that we take to finish off a crochet piece. So whenever I say fasten off, what I usually mean is to take off your stitch marker, and then we're going to slip stitch to the same stitch that our marker was just in, which is the first stitch of round 18. So to slip stitch, we're going to go through just like we would normally with a single crochet stitch. We'll yarn over and pull that through. But rather than yarning over and pulling through both, we're just going to keep pulling that loop until it goes through every loop that was on our hook. Then we can cut our yarn, and we need a little extra. So maybe, 12 inches or so should probably do it. I always like to have a little extra just in case. Then once you've cut that, we can pull that slip stitch through. So you just tug your loop longer and longer until the yarn goes through. And then we can tighten that slip stitch down into a knot, which is nice. Then we don't want our ghost to have this opening at the bottom, so what we're going to do next is take our tail that we've just cut, and the reason we cut it long is for this precise reason. And we're going to thread it through the eye of one of our tapestry needles. And then to close this last round off, we're going to take that needle and sew it through the front loops only. So remember, the front loops are the ones that are closest to the surface, which is really convenient because the back loops are a little hard to get at. So we're going to go and pass this needle underneath the front loops of every stitch. So there's one. I'm going to do that same thing again, and it's going to kind of curl what we're sewing around the outside. This is called a whip stitch, which we're probably going to use here later anyway. So we're going to keep sewing, whipping that yarn around. You'll sew through each of the 6 stitches left at the end of round 18. Then when you've done that, you can put your thumb really close to where that last stitch comes through and then pull that tail tight. And it cinches all of the stitches together, sort of like our magic loop at the very beginning. Then we can finish off by tying a surface knot. So remember when we did the mouth, we've already tied one of these. But let's review. We're going to loop our yarn over the surface of our work and sew down into a little of the fabric of the work, and then up through that loop that we've made, and then pull to tie a knot. And then we're going to weave that tail in. So to do that, I like to sew down into the body really close to where I tied my surface knot, and then send my tapestry needle out through a spot in the body. And when you pull that tight, the knot we tied goes inside. I'm also going to keep weaving that tail in. I'm just going to send it in one more time to make sure it's really woven in. And then we can cut that tail close to the surface of our work to weave it in. Alright, so that's the ghost's body complete. We've got one more thing we need to do, just to add the skirt here along the bottom. So to do that, we're going to reattach our yarn to the front loops left behind from round 16. So we're going to flip our ghost over so he's upside down. And we're also going to flip him so that his face is facing away from us. Because where we attach on, sometimes there's a little bit of a jog. So I like to hide it at the back of the ghost's body. Then we're going to take that white, the same color we made our ghost with, and take our hook and slip it through front to back one of the stitches left behind from round 16. Alright, so to get the skirt started, we can take our white yarn, and I like to fold it into a little bit of a loop, and then put that loop on my hook and pull it through that stitch. Alright, so once we have that loop pulled through, I like to arrange it so that my tail is laying along the back side of the loops I'm going to be working in, and then start tensioning my working yarn. So just like when we were working in the magic loop, we're going to work over both the stitch and the tail at the same time. So to make our first stitch, we're going to go through the front loop left behind here, and of course underneath the tail, and then yarn over and draw through, and yarn over and draw through both to make a single crochet. And then we're going to go through the next front loop left behind, yarn over, draw through both, and we're just going to keep adding one single crochet stitch to each of those front loops left behind all the way around. And once you've worked your tail in for a couple of stitches, you can actually cut it short. You don't have to work it in for very long. So I'm just going to give a snip. And I'm going to keep single crocheting all the way around to form the ghost's skirt. Right, so I am almost all the way around. If you look, the place that we fastened on has a loop coming out of it, but that's not actually a stitch. That's sort of like our stitch in progress. So I'm going to go through that same stitch, the front loop with that loop coming out of it, and make a single crochet stitch. And then we're going to fasten off by slip stitching to that loop. So you're going to go front to back through it and slip stitch. So that again is just to keep drawing that same stitch through. And then just like when we fastened off before, we're going to cut a little bit of a tail, 6 inches this time, nothing too long. Pull our slip stitch through, tighten that slip stitch, and then we're going to weave this tail in. I like to use a sharper needle whenever I'm weaving tails in rather than tying and cinching. So I'm going to be using a sharper darning needle for this. You can still use the same kind of plastic tapestry needle if you want, just a preference of mine here. I'm going to sew from front to back directly underneath that slip knot that we've tied with our slip stitch that we tightened down. And then I'm going to run this inside of the stitches of the skirt and then into the body of the ghost. That's why I like to use a sharp needle. Ooh. And we're going to pull, but not too tight, because we don't want to take the skirt down into the fabric with us. So I like to hold it and then pull as tight as I can while I've held it in place. And that weaves our tail in and means we can cut. And then I like to give the skirt one final look over, kind of give it a tug a little bit, make sure it's exactly how I want. And that wraps up the ghost portion of this tutorial. So if you wanted a ghost and only a ghost, congratulations, you've got a ghost. But if you'd like to stick around and learn how to make him a little accessory, I'm going to show you how to make the candy corn witch hat next. So before we get started on the candy corn witch hat, I wanted to point out some things about crochet that I think can be a little confusing and maybe will make this witch hat make a little more sense. So here you can see this is kind of what we did with our ghost for the first 3 rounds. And it's a base of 6 stitches, meaning we started with 6 single crochet stitches in our first round and then doubled that, so that would be 12. And then not doubled, but spread out. So we're always increasing by 6 stitches. So we've got 6, 12, and then 18. And when you work at the base of 6, it makes sort of a hexagon shape. You can kind of see it's even started here a little bit. But it makes a nice flat piece of work and it kind of rounds itself out. So it's great for things that we want to have sort of a spherical shape. Our hat, however, we don't want to have a spherical shape. We want it to be nice and pointy, just like a witch's hat. So we need to use a base of 3. And you can see I've started with 3 single crochet in a magic ring or magic loop here. And then I did the same thing here. I increased in the next round, increased in the next round, and we're increasing by 3 stitches each time. So you can see just from the first 3 rows, we have a nice pointy tip, which is what we want. So the reason we're starting with 3 stitches rather than 6 is so that we have a really nice pointy witch's hat. Alright, so we're starting with our white yarn for our candy corn witch hat. And we're going to begin once again by tying a magic loop. So pinch, wrap around the top, cross, wrap around the bottom, wedge, grab your lower loop, flip, pinch, pull, tension, pretzel, pull through, untangle. See, once you get the hang of it, you can get pretty quick at making a magic loop. But then we're going to be putting, like I mentioned before, 3 single crochet stitches inside of that magic loop. So remember, we're going to be working over both the magic loop tail and the ring itself. So yarn over, draw up, draw through, and then mark that stitch. I also like to tighten that stitch by pulling it over to the right. Right, so that's my first. Here's my second. And my third. So we're going to start in on round 2 by tightening our magic loop. And if you look, it really doesn't bring those 3 stitches closed. It's like begging for another 3 stitches inside because it's hard to make a circle out of 3. That's the point though. So for round 2, we're going to increase in each stitch. So we'll go ahead and take our stitch marker out. And then our first single crochet stitch needs to be pretty tight. So we're going to go through from front to back. I really pinch my work whenever I'm putting this first stitch in. And then draw up a loop, and then draw through both. And almost immediately your work's going to want to pop the wrong direction. So really make sure we keep the front side of our work facing out. And then we're going to mark that because it's our first stitch of the round. And then go through that same space. And then an increase in the next stitch. Really encourage your work to stay the right direction. It's going to want to kind of wiggle on you, don't let it. And then here's our last stitch, which gives us 6 stitches, and you can see the tip of our witch's hat is nice and pointy. Alright, so for round 3, we're going to put 1 single crochet stitch in the first stitch of the round. And then an increase in the next. And then repeat that sequence another 2 times. Alright, and we're ready for round 4, where we're going to put 1 single crochet stitch in the next 2 stitches. And when I start round 4, I like to pinch the hat at the very tip to hold on to it. So here's my first single crochet, and my second, and then my increase, and then repeat that sequence another 2 times. And here's my last decrease, so I'm going to do the first half of it. But then we need to change colors here, and we're changing to orange because that's next up in the custom candy corn color. So to do a color change, we're going to start by doing most of the second single crochet of our increase. So we're going to go through, yarn over, and drop a loop. But then we need to draw through these 2 loops in our new color. So first we're going to take this white and we're going to trim ourselves a short tail, maybe 3 inches. Don't need much. Then, just like we did when we fastened on our ghost's skirt, make ourselves a little loop of our new color, which is orange. Put that over our hook, and then we're going to draw our orange through the last 2 loops on our hook. Then we're going to want to tighten, so I like to pull my white tail to tighten that stitch down. And then this round is actually going to be an invisible color change round. So to do that, we're going to take our stitch marker out. Then we're going to be slip stitching in the back loop only of the next stitch. And we're going to make our slip stitches nice and loose. So I went through my back loop, and I'll draw a nice loose stitch. And I keep slip stitching until I am all the way around. Alright, so now that we've done our invisible color change, we're ready to start round 5. And for this color change to be as neat as possible, we also need to work in the back loop only of the slip stitches that we've made. So round 5, we're going to put 1 single crochet stitch in the next 3 back loops. So here's my first single crochet. I'm going to mark it. My second. third. And then we're going to increase in the next back loop. And then repeat that sequence another 2 times. But before we do, you're probably wondering, what do I do with all these tails? Well, to me, those are free stuffing. So I'm just gonna push them straight into the tip of the witch's hat. So they are out of my way, and it'll actually save me some stuffing later on down the road. All right, so back to round 5, we're gonna continue that sequence of 1 single crochet stitch in the next 3 stitches, and then an increase. All right, we're ready for round 6. We're back to working in both stitches, or I'm sorry, both sides of the stitch, so no more back loop only. So for round 6, we're going to start by putting 1 single crochet stitch in the next 4 stitches of the round. Followed by an increase. And then repeat that same sequence all the way around. All right, we're ready for round 7. We're gonna put 1 single crochet stitch in the next 5 stitches. You're probably starting to detect a bit of a pattern here. And then an increase in the next stitch. And then repeat that sequence another 2 times. Right, ready for round 8, where we're gonna put 1 single crochet stitch in the next 6 stitches. And then increase. And just like before, repeat that sequence another 2 more times. But then pause when we get the end because we've got 1 more color change to do. All right, I'm at my last orange increase, so I'm going to do the first half of it. And then remember, just like with the white, we need to do a color change in the second single crochet of our increase. So draw through most of it, cut yourself a short tail, 3 inches or so of the orange, then make yourself a little loop of the new color, which is yellow. And then we're gonna put that loop on our hook and then draw it through both of the loops left of our old color. And then we also want to tighten down the orange tail. And I'm going to take that yellow tail and put it with the orange tail and kind of just stuff it down into the hat, just like the last tails. All right, so we've got another invisible color change that we need to do with our new color. So go ahead and take your stitch marker out. And just like with the last color change, we're going to put a nice loose slip stitch in the back loop only of the orange. So remember, make these nice and loose, and we'll do that all the way around. Alright, so there's the invisible color change started, and just like when we did the orange and white earlier, for this round we're going to be working in the back loop only again. And we're going to start a sequence of 1 single crochet stitch in the next 2 stitches. Don't forget, you want to mark this first stitch too. So here's my first single crochet in the back loop, my second, and then we're going to increase. And if you remember when I talked about the difference between base of 3 and base of 6, we're actually switching to a base of 6 now, which is going to give us the brim of our hat. So there's my first 2 and increase. I'll continue that same sequence, another 5 times total, until I am all the way around my hat. Alright, we're ready for our last round, which is round 10. And we're going to put one single crochet stitch in the next 3 stitches. And then follow that with an increase. And then repeat that sequence all the way around. Alright, so we're ready to fasten off, and the way I like to fasten off the hat is a little different than how we fastened off before. I'm going to take my stitch marker out, and then I want the brim of the hat to be as even as possible. So I like to fasten off by making a really tight single crochet stitch in my next stitch. Then in the next stitch I'll make a loose slip stitch, and then a tight slip stitch. And that sort of helps keep the brim round and doesn't have a weird jog on that side. Alright, so now we're ready to go ahead and cut ourselves a little bit of a tail. And we'll want this to be kind of long, maybe 12 inches or so, because we're going to use it to attach to our ghost's head. So go ahead and pull your last slip stitch through and tighten. And then we need to send the tail so that it meets up with where the yellow meets our invisible color change. So go ahead and take your tail that you just cut and thread it through the eye of your tapestry needle. And then just like before, I'm going to sew a stitch directly underneath that slip stitch. I pull that one tight so it sort of sits flush to the hat. And then I'm going to run my needle through the centers of those stitches on the inside of the hat. And then up through that invisible color change so that I am ready to attach to the ghost's head. Alright, so let's get the hat attached to our ghost and finish off this pattern. Alright, so it's time to get our ghost and our hat attached. So first, I like to kind of attach mine at a jaunty angle. You definitely don't need to attach it the same way that I do. You can put it more dead set on if you want. I like the jaunty angle, so I like to kind of set mine onto the side of my ghost's head. And then really quick too, you also want to put the side where that jog is towards the back. I know that's a good way to kind of hide that it's there. And then before we start sewing, we also want to put a little more stuffing inside of the hat itself. You don't need very much, just enough to kind of stuff where the orange and white are. The yellow is going to be the brim of the hat. Alright, so now that I've got that, I'm going to put it onto my ghost's head at an angle because I think that looks the cutest. And we're going to take our tapestry needle, which I've left threaded from when we sewed that yellow to the brim. And I like to put my hat on by sewing down into the hat and then grabbing a bit of the fabric of the ghost's body. And then just sort of whip stitching it on, kind of back stitching a little bit. So I'll come up here. You can see I'm coming up where the orange and yellow meet each time, which helps hide those yellow stitches. And we're just going to do this all the way around the ghost's head. Alright, so I've sewn all the way around. I'm also going to lift up the brim and just double check there isn't any. Oh, I've got a little stuffing coming through here, so I'm going to give that a snip. But other than that, it looks like I've got it attached pretty good to his head. So then we are ready to fasten off, and that's going to entail another surface knot. So I'm going to grab just a little of the fabric, come up through that loop, pull till I tie a little knot, and then I'm going to weave it into the fabric of the hat. So just up through, and then pull tight to pull that knot to the inside. And then give it a trim. So that is the hat attached to our ghost. And then last, let me show you how I like to tie the ribbons onto the ghost's body. So we're going to need a pretty big-eyed tapestry needle because we're going to put the ribbon through the eye of that needle. So go ahead and grab your ribbon, and we don't need too terribly much, maybe 6 inches or so of our ribbon. And then we're going to thread that ribbon through the eye of our tapestry needle, but just barely. We just need a little through the eye, so maybe like 1/4 of an inch. And then this is kind of up to you where you'd like to attach the ribbon. I like mine to look like a bow tie, so I try to center it underneath the mouth. I'm going to take my tapestry needle and sew just through one of the stitches as close to the center of the mouth as I can. The idea is we're going to just pass that ribbon underneath that stitch. And then I like to tug mine until it's as close to being flat as I can. And then so it's about halfway through that stitch. Alright, so I like to make the left side of my bow a little longer than the right side because we're going to be doing a lot of wrapping with the left side. So we're going to start off by pinching a loop on the right side of our bow, and we're going to take the left side and we're going to go behind. So we're wrapping clockwise around the bow. And then we're going to take that same side and we're going to pass it up underneath. So we're making like a big loop around that pinch that we've made in the right side. So you can see that loop, we're going to tighten it down, but not too tight. Then we're going to take the left side that we wrapped around and we're going to thread it back through the center of that bow. And then we have a little wiggling to do. So you can pull both sides apart from each other to tighten. And then I find I have to sort of pull the tails and then tighten again and then pull the tails until my bow looks the way that I want it to look. Once you've got your bow the way you like it, I like to give mine a little special cut. So I'll trim sort of a V on the ends of each side of the bow. And that wraps up this candy corn bow tie ghost tutorial just in time for Halloween. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I would be absolutely delighted if you consider giving me a follow on my channel. Your follows tell me that I should make more videos and that you like my videos, so please give me a subscribe if you really like what I do. Thank you for watching, and happy Halloween!